Rob J. Gayers here. I'm trying to make a video, or excuse me, an audio about what is happening with these drugs. Um, there's a character in toxicology who is the father of modern toxicology, and his famous saying, and it's the basic principle of toxicology, is the dose makes the poison. Um, all drugs are actually poison, and it just depends on the dose, whether it's a medicine or a poison, and sometimes it's both at the same time, such as the case with sedatives, once they start poisoning you. Okay, now the reason for that is there in toxicology, that is the other side of the coin in medicine, right? The dose makes the poison or the medicine. Um, and doctors are not really trained in toxicology very well, so they don't really understand that poisonings are not side effects. So you'll hear these doctors call them side effects. But if you ask the toxicologist what it was, they'd tell you that it's actually a poisoning. And that's why people die from drugs, and they get sick from drugs, and they have injuries that last years from drugs, particularly sedatives, because the sedative effect is happening at the same time as the poisoning effect. So when your dose is too high, and you're being poisoned very, very slowly in most cases, for several years or even several months or whatever it takes for that poisoning to overwhelm the sedation, it will manifest itself in what appears to be what a lot of people online call tolerance withdrawal. There's no such thing really. It's a buildup of toxicity, which overwhelms the sedation. Okay, and how that manifests itself is it looks like an interdose problem. Right? And the point at which you first entered you first had interdose problems is the point of where your toxicity overwhelmed your sedation. And once that happened and you had to updose, and some people don't updose, but if you kept updosing from that point, you need to get your taper down below that point before you do a very slow taper. Okay, if you can do that, then you get to a point where you may not be poisoning yourself anymore with the drug's poisonous effect. Okay, all drugs are poisons. They can't avoid it. The reason for that is poisons are used to induce a response in the body, which is adaptive. Okay, and these adaptive responses are actually medicinal because what they do is they overcompensate. It's much like somebody who's lifting weights or somebody who's getting in shape, and they exercise more than their system is used to. That's kind of like a poisoning, right? And what happens is the body will compensate for that and make it a little bit stronger. Well, the same thing happens with drugs. If you insult the body with a small amount of poison, the body will compensate and it will make it stronger. And this is something that's happening besides the sedative effect. Okay, so you have two compounding things as medicine, but if the dose is too high, that one thing that is not the sedation will become toxic. And now you have a problem with a sedative suppressing its own toxicity. See, so you're having a medicine for the toxicity in the same drug or the same medicine, and that's why the problem is so much worse with these sedatives because they mask their own toxicity. You don't have this problem with stimulants because if you're stimulated and you have a bad reaction to stimulant, you can feel it right away. There's nothing suppressing that. So that is the deal with here. In drug-induced delirium, the protocol, and you can look this up, and I can show it to you myself if somebody wants to message me or join my group or whatever. Like, I'm not charging people. I'm not trying to make a fortune like these taper doctors are doing. I'm just trying to give people the right information. I'm not asking anything from them, but I'm telling you with the fault in their logic, and I know they're doctors and they have years and years of medical knowledge, and they don't have years and years of toxicological knowledge. They haven't studied toxicology. Doctors are not, and you can ask AI or Google if doctors are trained in toxicology, and they'll tell you they have very limited knowledge in toxicology. And I believe the reason for that is because it's a policy issue. The government doesn't want doctors telling people that side effects are actually poisons. Some of them, anyway. Um, Otherwise, nobody would take their medicine, right? And we're talking about billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars generated from and these people run their campaigns, and so there has to be a lot of money being made, and they're not going to scare people away from their medicine. Medicines do save lives in a lot of cases, so like I'm not totally against medicines, even if they are also poisons. You just got to get the dose wrong, right? But the problem that they have is they have a risk assessment problem because there is no way to tell in a dose response, which is what they use to do risk assessment. Now, if you Google principles of toxicology and dose responses, you'll find out how they actually do risk assessment. It's very primitive, really. They will take 100 mice, and they'll keep raising the dose and raising the dose and raising the dose until 50 of them are dead. And they'll say, okay, that's a toxic dose. And they'll take only a portion of that dose, and then they'll take that dose amount and try it out on people. And if the people do well, then that is their drug phases, their drug trials. And then, but they don't look at the long-term risk, and the dose, the adage, the dose makes the poison, it has two aspects to them. One is the dose, immediate dose, so it's how much you take now, and the other is the dosage rather than dose, which is the amount you take over a certain amount of time. And after years of use, exposure to a certain poison, which is a medicine, will become toxic down the road somewhere. And so you could be fine and get off. You can be on a sedative for a while and then just jump right off of them and you'll be fine. This happens all the time in the general public. It's just that they don't have these people online because they didn't have problems. They are living their life and they're getting their medicine from the benzo or the opioid or whatever it is that they're on. They're not going to be in here screaming that benzo withdrawal is horrible because they don't have that problem. And in fact, that happened to me. I've been off benzos after years of use without any problem whatsoever until that was no longer the case. And the on and offs tend to initiate reactions. That means that the dose is lowered. The level of tolerance is lowered so that if you jump off taking, say, 4 milligrams and get off and you're fine and months later you want to reinstate at the same dose, well, the on and offs lower the amount at which your system can handle. And that's that Goldilocks zone where you don't react is the limits of biological plasticity. It has to do with genetics, not genetics per se, but gene expressions, the way that outside influences affect the genes. It's sort of genetics, but it's more like an environmental thing where, it's like an outside influence that affects the genes. That's what epigenetics is. Epigenetics means above. Epi means above the genes. So it's the things that affect the genes. So when people get scared off by the word epigenetics actually is more like the nurture part of nature, nurture. So you have genetics and epigenetics. And although they both sound like genetics, one is actually the outside influences that affect genetics. But anyway, the problem with these tapers is that people are not told to reduce their dose to get below the point where they first had problems. And if you can do that, you either reduce or completely get rid of any toxicity, and your body can begin to come back to homeostasis. It starts to heal. But until you get the toxic effect out of your body, and that is completely dependent on the dose, your body cannot begin to heal. So if you do not get into that Goldilocks zone where you're no longer being poisoned anymore, you're going to have problems in your taper, and you potentially could completely backfire and poison you during your entire taper. Those who do get in the Goldilocks zone, meaning that their toxicity is no longer happening because they lowered the dose quickly enough, can slowly do a taper, and even though they've acquired an injury, that injury will heal because there's no more toxicity due to the dose amount of your sedative, and you have a sedative masking it. So as you heal, you can lower the sedative amount a little bit more, wait to heal a little bit more, and then lower the sedative a little bit more. And it doesn't have anything to do with up and down, receptor up and down regulation. That's not really scientific. They say it is, but they don't really understand what that means. It just means that your receptors are messed. I mean, I don't even understand what that. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, explain that. Why? Why are the receptors up and down regulated? It's not. That's not the right science. This receptor saturation model does not include toxicity, which can happen at the same time as poisoning. And if a toxicity happening at the same time as sedation, if a toxicity and a sedation are happening at the very same time, you're not going to be able to tell because the sedation is going to negate. You're going to have a net zero effect with toxicity and sedation, and it's going to look like no. As you reduce the dose, it's going to look like no harm. But you're actually increasing the sedation and increasing the toxicity, and they negate each other. So you can be poisoned without even knowing it, due to the sedation masking the problem. So what happens when people hold too long and they just keep getting worse on these tapers, and they're not in the Goldilocks zone where they stop being poisoned? Basically, that's what toxicity is a poisoning, right? So what happens is they continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse, and these taper doctors will tell them to hold, and it's the same mantras to the groups because slower is better. But if you're getting poisoned, if you're paradoxically getting poisoned because the dose is too high, that's just going to make it worse, and you're just going to accumulate more and more of this injury, which is delirium. You can call it mind if you want, but delirium information there's tons of that online. You can look into that. Mind is, brand new. They don't know much about that. And there's just, delirium has been known about for thousands of years. It's just not all been drug induced. Mercury will induce delirium. There's lots of things that will induce delirium. Metals are known for that. So, I mean, Hippocrates, used to write about it in his books, and they're in libraries. And Aristotle even, wrote about instances where he knew people who were delirious and their injury lasted for years. This is the same thing. It's all about the dose. So when people are holding and they're getting worse, they might be in that toxic zone. They're having a paradoxical reaction, which is it's being masked by the sedation. So every time they take a pill, they're getting more sedative effect, but they're also getting a little bit more poison. So they'll say, "Well, I feel funny. I don't really feel worse, but I feel funny." And but when their drug starts wearing off, it's like now they're having worse problems with the inner dose, right? And the reason is they've been poisoning themselves with the dose, but they're also taking more sedative. So they cancel each other out until the sedative wears off. The toxicity does not wear off, and the problem just gets worse and worse and worse. Whether they're updosing or they're holding, this could be the case. And some people actually, the way that you can tell if you're getting poisoned in a lot of cases is to reduce the dose significantly, and you will get relief from that. Even though you get a less sedative effect, if the poisoning is more severe, you'll get a relief from that. And if people get relief immediately after cutting, they should keep cutting because they're not in the Goldilocks zone. They're still getting poisoned. So another one is when you increase the dose. Okay, when you increase the dose and you're not in the Goldilocks zone, what happens? Well, you get more sedation, but you also get more poison. And those things can negate each other at first, but as time goes on, the sedation does not increase, but the toxicity increases, little by little by little by little, and it will start poisoning you, and it will add to the underlying injury until all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, now I feel it. It's getting worse, and then when you try to cut down on the sedation, it's the toxicity starts poking through. And it looks like an interdose problem again, or I'm getting worse. And this happens on these tapers, and people don't understand what's happening. Even these doctors don't understand that that's happening. I have all kinds of people, because I'm a paradoxical reaction guy, and I've been posting about it for years. I've made a post at Benzel Buddies called Caught Between a Paradoxical Reaction and Withdrawal. And it's still up there on Benzel Buddies. I can't access it, the personal messages, so nobody should personal message me there, I don't think. And I wrote a huge thing about it with all kinds of articles, and I can't get my account anymore. I made a new account, but I can't access the old one. But you can read that, and I'm also, under Rob J. Garris, and under Rob J. Garris, I've left some posts in the groups, and people will contact me after using their doctor who updosed them, and wanting to know about paradoxical reactions because they know, like, it's so intense that they know they have paradoxical reactions. So they contact me, and I tell them, what happened. You were poisoned, and a lot of these people were told to updose a sizable portion and then hold there indefinitely. So they're like 4 or 6 months in, and they contact me and says, I just keep getting worse. I just keep getting worse. And the doctor tells me to hold there until I stabilize. Well, the only way that's going to work, this updose, is if you are still in the Goldilocks zone and you're not being poisoned. But, medicine turns into poison when the dose is too high. So if you updose and you start getting worse, that's not going to that's not going to level out after time. It's just going to keep getting worse. You need to get more and more what feels like sensitized. And I've talked to many of these people, and one of them died. He was a client of one of these taper doctors, and he came to me, and I've got all the messages from him and me talking, and the doctor. He didn't tell me who it was at first, but now I know who it was. But he updosed him, and all of a sudden he was just going crazy, and he couldn't hardly write anymore, and most of them take breaks because he was poisoned by the updose. So these doctors are telling you that you updose and you have side effects. These side effects aren't relieved by going down again. They stay there because they're not side effects; they're poisonings, and that is the problem with these tapers. Is people need to get the dose low enough quickly into the zone where they're not having toxicity anymore before they can do a long taper. If they can do that, then the long tapers will work. Some people are on here and they don't have toxicity. They just want to get off their benzo because they don't really feel unaffected anymore from it, or they don't need it anymore. And they come on and they read, oh my God, the people are 10 years off and they never recovered. So they decide to do a 3-year taper, but there was nothing wrong. They could have been off in a couple of days if there's no toxicity, and they would have been fine. It's just a matter of the dose. If the dose is too high and it's caused an underlying injury, then you're going to have problems getting off unless you do it very, very slowly once you get the dose down quickly enough to stop the toxicity. That's why you have all these wide variations of people on their tapers and say, you got to go slower. But if you're paradoxically reacting, you have to go faster because you got to get out of the zone where you're reacting. The dose makes the poison. Paracelsus, look up Paracelsus. There's some videos, good ones, explain exactly what he was about and how that's the absolute most important principle of toxicology. The dose makes the poison. I have a lot more information on hormesis, and hormesis is basically the same thing. Dose makes the poison, but there's a lot of aspects to it that explain a lot in medicine. And Western medicine has not yet grasped the idea of hormesis. They're looking for a mechanism, and that's coming soon. But hormesis is going to revolutionize Western medicine. They just, they can't inform people that they look, sorry, we've been poisoning you and calling it side effects. They're not going to do that. So they're going to slowly transition, and this transition is coming. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be in the next 5 years or the next 50 years. We don't know. So that is my message for today. My advice on tapering is to cut the dose quickly to get out of the toxic zone where the tapers actually work. If you don't do that quickly, you're going to have all kinds of problems with being poisoned during your taper. Because the more you get poisoned, the less it takes of the drug to make more poison. It has to do with the cells being sick. When a cell is sick, it can only handle so much poison. Like the dose is just completely reduced. Some people will react at any dose if they're poisoned enough. So it's really a sad thing. And I hope people listen to me. I'm not a doctor, but I do have a degree in mathematics. I was very smart. I love science, and science was my life. Sports and science, and I study, I learn, and I know what I'm talking about here. And of course, I'm going to get attacked here, but I've been studying this for a long time. I've been studying toxicology, and doctors don't study toxicology, and that is their problem. Thank you, Rob J. Garris. People can message me if they want to. If I get overwhelmed, I can't return everything, but as for right now, I'm not overwhelmed. If anybody has any questions, I have tons of evidence to back up what I'm saying. I have tons of people that I've absolutely convinced that is absolutely correct by showing them this evidence, and I'm willing to help more until the table is turned on this epidemic of paradoxical reactions online which are not being recognized and are causing a pretty decent size, pretty decent percentage of people to have their tapers backfire because they don't understand this basic principles of toxicology, and neither do these doctors, and neither did Ashton. So, okay, thanks, Rob J. Garris. Again, thank you for listening, and I won't be responding to attacks. I would just block people who do that, probably. So, I'm not going to argue with anybody. But the people out there know they're poison. They're going to respond to this. The tapers don't work for everybody. Peace.